series at Dust James, Anti-Imperialist America. I'm very honored today to have Taiwan-based hip-hop artist Xiangyu with us today. How are you today?
Great. Thanks for having me here.
Right on, right on. So, for folks that don't know your work, maybe you could introduce yourself, a little bit about maybe the Taiwanese hip hop scene and where you're coming from, and maybe a little bit about your backstory.
Oh, that's a very broad question. I'll do my best.
Okay.
I'm a Marxist-Leninist rapper. So a lot of my music will have themes related to class struggle, imperialism, and that sorts. And I over the past 2 years, I released two albums, and I'm working on my next one. All my albums are in Chinese, but my latest album, A Single Spark, is available on YouTube for free with English subtitles, and it's also on Spotify. But if you don't understand Chinese, you might want to watch the video with the subtitles to really get the full experience.
Right on. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about where you're originally from, maybe how you came to Marxism, a little bit more about where you're coming from.
Okay, so I was born and raised in the U.S. to like Chinese parents. My mom is from Taiwan, and my dad is a Huagyo, which Huagyo in Korean or Huachao in Chinese, meaning like overseas Chinese. So he's part of the Chinese diaspora in Korea. And so, growing up in the US with that sort of background, you hear a lot of stories about, things happening not just in mainland China, but also in Taiwan and Korea. And as a kid, I went to Taiwan a lot just over the summers. And before I started school, I would spend months at a time. And I learned Chinese as my first language. So until I started learning English in school in the US, I really couldn't connect with American kids since I didn't really speak the language. So like I felt more at home in Taiwan during that part of my life, especially because over there I can actually make myself heard and I can communicate with my peers and stuff. So how I came to Marxism, well, I guess growing up as a minority in the US, you hear a lot of you hear different stories about things. So like you learn to question the mainstream narrative a little bit more. Like when they tell stories about, I don't know, like the issues in between like North and South Korea, it's presented in like a very oversimplified manner. But like if you have like family roots over there, things are a little bit more nuanced. And then when you see these inconsistencies, you become a little bit more curious and you want to just dig a little bit deeper. I think that was part of the experience for me. And also, I think my family going through financial hardships during my last few years of college had a great impact on me. As that was around the time I started really studying imperialism, and so I didn't really become a communist until I became anti-imperialist. Whereas I think in the West, it's usually the other way around. Like people start having these like leftist proclivities and sympathies, and then only then do they really learn about imperialism. And it's a bit of a abstract concept almost when your family does it. If you're like from the West for generations and you don't really have family stories to connect with stuff when you're studying imperialism. So I think working the other way around, like kind of understanding imperialism first and then reading about, the US imperialist activities, not only in like the countries where my family's from, but also in places like, the Middle East, Africa, Latin America, etc. You really, it really puts things into perspective. And then when you connect that with class issues, you realize how Lenin was right. Imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism, and you can't be anti-capitalist without being anti-imperialist. I think the financial hardships and also going through a foreclosing also kind of just I feel like I would have become a communist anyways, but that kind of just catalyzed the process for me. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So you born in the U.S.
Yes.
You spent time in both Korea and Taiwan,
I didn't really spend too much time in Korea. I spent more time in Taiwan.
and you're a hip hop artist out of Taiwan,
Yes.
promoting Marxist Leninism. part of the International Popular Front against imperialism. That that is amazing, and I'm glad to have you as a guest on here. Such a rich backstory. What really spoke to me and what you just said was I actually was anti-war
Mm-hmm.
before I became communist. I was pacifist, anti-war. A lot of like some of the true meanings of Jesus and the Quakerism and pacifism. And then I learned about Lenin, who was the greatest anti-war activist in human history. Who the Russian Revolution happened because the peasants were tired of fighting unjust wars for the benefit of the czar, and overthrew in the bourgeoisie in that country. That's interesting. So I guess we'll continue on. You wrote an article. You started following me on Facebook. You said you've seen some of my videos, and that's awesome. Um, let's see, and you've actually been having interactions with some of the Facebook interactions. My struggle sessions with liberals and conservatives in the United States, and I'm trying to develop how to speak about Marxism to working people in plain terms.
Mm-hmm.
And Facebook is almost like it's like a training ground. Like it's an opportunity, like to access people and then work on and you've been right there beside me, also doing the same in those struggle sections. And that brought us here to this interview. One of the things you shared that I found absolutely inspiring that went along your background, talked about your background. And also, I believe, was a continuation. You applied as a Marxist-Leninist, scientific socialist. I believe you correctly and innovatively applied Marxist-Leninism to current situation. And the title of your article was Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Class Struggle. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about this concept.
Anti-imperialism, the highest stage.
Oh, I'm sorry. Anti-imperialism. What did I say?
You said imperialism is the highest.
I'm sorry. Anti-imperialism. That's Lenin's book only.
Yes.
All right. So again, you wrote an article called Anti-Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Class Struggle. You tell us a little bit about this position.
I think the premise of that is seeing a lot of leftists in the U.S. having decent positions on domestic issues. Like people like your typical Bernie supporter comes to mind. The workers deserve higher wages. They deserve to have more rights. They deserve to have a more democratized workplace and all of this, which is fine. But as soon as it comes to foreign policy, for some reason, they align with the State Department more often than not. And then when you bring up issues, when you even just make a statement such as the U.S. should end its aggression towards the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, for example, people are like, oh, so does that mean you support the dictatorship in the Hermit Kingdom? And my response is usually, well, let's just assume that everything you hear in the media about countries like the DPRK are true, which they're not. How is U.S. intervention going to make their lives better? Right. And a lot of these positions come from a position of ignorance and also internalized American exceptionalism, which then the ruling class uses to justify further aggression towards countries that piss them off, basically. Countries that are unwilling to follow the Washington Consensus.
Right, maybe you can talk a little bit. I'm not sure. Some of the best articles that I find in the U.S. on this,
Mm-hmm.
I think I forgot his name. One of the guys with Black Agenda Report, Danny Hayfong, often
Mm-hmm.
writes about how the anti-Chinese, the Chinese xenophobia, even amongst Western leftists,
Mm-hmm.
has a lot to do with racism. It's linked to it. And you said American exceptionalism. Maybe you can talk on this a little bit more.
And where would you like me to begin?
Yeah, that's a big. Yeah, I know, right?
Because there's a lot we can go into, and as you can probably tell at this point, I'm not the best public speaker.
Mm. Yeah, just maybe I'll explain it. You can come off of it. Like You talk like look at right now, xenophobia is at an all-time high. You got Democratic supporters like out here saying Putin is Trump's puppet, drawing pictures of him on a leash. You got the debate. You look at the Democratic debate. You got Biden and Trump being like, "I hate China." No, I hate China more. And then you got people just picking up on this. And I mean, racism is so prevalent, xenophobia is so prevalent. I mean, that explains like I mean, if you look at it materially, this is a country that's being attacked. I mean, and this is Venezuela. This is every non-white country. Seems to be they can't have democracy. When the State Department says that they're messed up, oh, you believe it because they're not white. I mean, maybe you could any response to that?
Wait, sorry, I was looking at the comments. Um, I think yeah, a lot of the xenophobia is weaponized to justify, like I said before, the US's aggressive policies towards countries that don't toe the line that Washington sets. So you can't just go around saying, "Hey, I want to sabotage this country economically, politically." So I mean, you look at the way, for example, what was left of Yugoslavia, how that was dismembered by the Clinton administration. A lot of it is media hype and feeding people stories about how the Serbs were terrible. And yeah, in Yugoslavia the Serbs did do some atrocious things, but they kind of just divorce it from the context, like what was that in response to, and what did the other, like the right-wing groups in places like Bosnia, Croatia, etc., like what kind of stuff did they do? But no, instead the media just like portrays like it's useful, I don't want to say allies, it's puppets, as like angels, whereas like the people they're trying to overthrow as the bad guys. And we're seeing a repeat of that now with the whole situation with Xinjiang in China, with the Uyghur situation. Just a bunch of very ridiculous stories. I mean, yeah, there might be, you could say that China's approach to handling this sort of terrorism is heavy-handed, but why resort to lies like one after another? Like, oh, they're forcing Uyghur women to marry Han Chinese men while locking up like millions of Uyghur men and like committing genocide. And the purpose of these stories is to paint certain groups of people as barbaric and in need of enlightenment, basically, in the form of US aggression and destabilization, obviously.
Hmm. Very. What has been historically? What do you think the result of U.S. aggression has been? Has it been these places magically becoming free, or what has been the result of it?
I mean, you can look at Pinochet. You can look at Iraq. Like after Saddam Hussein was overthrown, did Iraq become a better place? I mean, we can go all day and talk about the merits and demerits of Saddam, but one thing that can't be denied is life was better when he was around than it is now. Like after the U.S. just toppled the government and just created a huge quagmire that to this day like is still unresolved. You look at Afghanistan. The U.S. invaded Afghanistan and overthrew the Taliban, but at the same time, who created the power vacuum that allowed the Taliban to come to power? After overthrowing I don't know how to pronounce his name. The guy's name who starts with a T. When the U.S. kind of egged the Soviet Union into entering, they egged the Soviet Union on into going into Afghanistan, and after having worked with the Mujahideen, after the U.S. started working with the Mujahideen in secret, you look at the Contras in Nicaragua. And you look at Latin America. I think Latin America alone, right in the U.S.'s backyard, is a lot of evidence that the U.S. doesn't go in for genuine purposes, and unless you meet certain conditions, your life does not really become better. I mean, you can talk about places like Taiwan where US intervention did allow, I don't want to say that the US allowed things like allowed it to become a thriving economy. It was more because it was on the front line of the Cold War and that it needed to create it needed to prove that capitalism was the superior system, that it allowed certain countries like Taiwan or the southern half of Korea to, develop economically with, some sort of in a planned manner, not a socialist planned economy, but nonetheless in a planned manner, so that like it wouldn't just become another, you know, puppet regime of the US.
Right now, I think you're touching on something. I mean, if you look at the absolute chaos and destruction, Libya is a great example.
Oh yes.
Um, Slavery has returned,
Mm-hmm.
mass starvation, genocide of black skinned African migrants as a result of Obama, a Democratic president,
Mm-hmm. It's also
destroying that
sorry,
country. Go
I'm just
ahead.
gonna interrupt. I mean, it goes to show that people are like, oh, Kamala Harris is great because she's a black woman of who also has like partial Indian ancestry, and it's like it doesn't matter your skin color or your gender if you're serving imperialism and you're serving white supremacy. Obama was a black president. Did that stop him from turning the richest country in Africa into hell on earth, complete with a slave market?
Wow. I mean, you put it like that. I think there's something else to be said about if a country is useful to the United States,
Mm-hmm.
they may prop up that country and
Taiwan and
and
South
promote
Korea.
different. Yeah, exactly. Taiwan, South Korea, Germany after during the Cold War,
Yes, and after.
um, and continuing after with NATO. So it's something as soon as no longer become useful to U.S. imperialism linked to Europe, the imperialist bloc, it's over. You
Mm-hmm.
become another Honduras, or Honduras had a coup.
Mm-hmm.
Also Obama.
Yeah.
That was one of the major migrant crises. Was
Yes.
from Honduras. You become, I mean, comparing Puerto Rico to Cuba, which are similar, have similar resources,
Mm-hmm.
both in the Caribbean. Um, maybe people don't really understand anti-imperialism, and
It's
people
an
don't really.
abstract. It's a
Go
very
ahead.
abstract concept for many, just because it's so removed from their daily lives and their families that it's not really something they really think about. And when they do think about it, once again, it's mostly from the media and from books. And unless you are willing to relearn a lot of the history that you learned growing up, your no matter how great your theory is, if your understanding of history is very skewed towards the American bourgeois narrative, then the conclusions that you will reach will more or less align with those that the State Department want you to reach.
I think that the way you came to anti-imperial, well, first you said you started off more anti-imperialist and tamed the communism, and a lot of people don't know that Lenin called imperialism also monopoly capitalism, which I often make the point. The the economic system of capitalism, monopoly capitalism, the same thing that keeps us poor here, denies us wages, takes away our benefits, doesn't invest in our roads and public services, is the same economic reason and force for the crystallization of imperialism, which is these disgusting outright attacks on people's sovereignty in the
Yes,
form of brutal war, in suppression.
the same people who flooded the black communities with crack cocaine are the same people who are sanctioning Cuba and Venezuela, and who carried out a coup in Bolivia last year. And these are connections that need to be made because it's part of a unified front. If you look at all of these things as separate issues, then you're isolated. I think that was one of the points that I made in the article that you shared.
So, and that's a new concept. The anti-imperialism, the highest stage of class struggle. What I coined the United Front. I'm sorry, I popular front because of my
Mm-hmm.
emphasis on culture.
Mm-hmm.
Popular front against imperialism. These are innovations in the struggle. I mean, this is Marxism and applying it, not just reading Marx and Lenin, but applying it to the world in which we live in. Um, any response on that? And how did you come up with this? What is the process of going about understanding and applying Marxism?
Well, I mean, if you understand Marxism, then there's communism because there's capitalism. There's the proletariat because there's the bourgeoisie. You don't just wish these things away. That would be pretty idealistic. There's a material basis for all of this stuff. Like the, for example, the economic base more or less determines the cultural superstructure. And if you just go with that, then if imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism, then and capitalism involves class struggle, I mean, there's the oppressor's class struggle. I mean, it's being carried out every day. And there's also the oppressed, the class struggle of the oppressed, the proletariat. Then, if that's the highest form of capitalism, then wouldn't I guess anti-capitalism on the international stage be the highest stage of anti-capitalism? Because that's what I find is so lacking from, especially like the DSA types in the U.S., but also sadly a lot of self-proclaimed Marxists and Marxist-Leninists and Trotskyists. But that's to be expected.
They're missing anti. So me, dude living in rural North Carolina with a basic understanding of Marxism, and wanting to get this stuff right, can see this. Anybody can see this. It's a
Mm-hmm.
science. But the U.S. is so twisted with racism and xenophobia and the biggest media system, the biggest brainwashing media system both parties the world has ever seen. We have this, as Caleb says, the synthetic left,
Mm-hmm.
which focuses on social issues instead of the political economic.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, there's rightfully so. People do say that class reductionism is bad, and I totally agree. But at the same time, I think the reverse is also true. There is a tendency of identity reductionism, especially in the I guess what you call the synthetic left, or what we call baizuo.
Wow. Okay.
Like
Well, I learned a new term here.
Baizuo. You've probably seen it before, but
Uh
just didn't
huh.
know it was pronounced that way.
Bai Zhao.
Baizuo, Zuo.
Oh,
It literally means white left, but bai is
okay.
also short for 白痴, which means idiot, and zuo means left.
So literal white idiot leftist.
Or it could be like white left or white idiot leftist, but it could also be white as in like red army, white army, that sort of.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, that is beautiful. This is a world phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the apparatus, the CIA has its tentacles in color revolutions
Yes,
all over the world.
you co-opt and appropriate leftist aesthetics, terminology, but then you apply them in such a way that it really just um, immobilizes the left. I mean, so that's why I think when we need to ask questions on, is this useful for the people? Is this not useful for the people? Like I keep on seeing online the argument saying, hey, I'm telling people to read theory is ableist because you're assuming that everyone can read. And I disagree with that. I think because there are people who have trouble um, reading and studying for whatever reason, could be because they're not educated enough, could be whatever, but I also think it's ableist to just assume that people can't read. But that's another point. Because there are people who are incapable, that it makes it such that people who are capable are even more responsible for doing so. So then they can teach these things to people who cannot learn through reading theory. Like and people also say, oh, it's ableist to say that leftists should try to stay in shape and train because the right wings doing the same, so we should be prepared. And they're like, well, you're just assuming that everyone's able-bodied. And I'm like, no, it's because we know that some people are not able-bodied, that able-bodied people should do these things so they can protect their non-able-bodied comrades. Wouldn't you agree? So when we look at these things, like you have to think, is this useful for the people or not? Like even AOC was saying like reading theory as bougie or whatever. It's just so astonishing how so much of this stuff, and I just can't help but think that these sort of the CIA cultural programs were kind of what encouraged these sorts of trends in the Western left.
Well, yeah, maybe we can bring it. And we're talking a lot of theory and stuff
Mm-hmm.
here. Maybe we can bring it down for some folks. Um, I've noticed a lot of xenophobia and racism in the current time period with COVID-19. I understand you're living in Virginia, in the
Yes.
South. How has that experience been for you? How have some of those interactions you've had with the people in Virginia?
I haven't really experienced anything directly, but I will say that in when it comes to Asians in America, a lot of the racism that we face isn't as direct and overt. Like people don't typically. I mean, it does happen, but people typically don't go up to you and call you, "Oh, you're a chink, you're a gook, whatever." It's more it's more of their attitudes towards you, and it's done in such a way that you can't really prove definitively that they're racist, but you can suspect it.
Hmm.
Yeah, I haven't
I
personally
wow.
experienced racism during COVID, but I know it's happened with a lot of people in many places. Like I saw a Facebook status the other day from a classmate who said that I think her mother like coughed this one time at a supermarket when the pandemic just began, and everyone just like singled her out and said, "Oh, like you got the Wuhan flu, you like go back to China."
Yeah, I
She's not
mean,
even
I
Chinese, but that's besides the point.
right on. I mean, I noticed they closed like almost all the China, like a lot of the restaurants stayed open in North
Hmm.
Carolina, but almost all of the Chinese and Asian restaurants
Oh,
closed.
really? Over here, all the Chinese restaurants stayed open,
Hmm.
and
Okay.
takeout business has increased by a lot. I work in one
Right
part
on.
time because
Hmm.
I'm studying computer science right now, and I also work at a Chinese restaurant. And it's like I'm starting to get sick of it. Too many damn orders.
Right on. Um, I was going. Oh, I trained a guy who was a refugee. I used to drive flatbed tractor trailer.
Hmm.
Crazy hours, tarping, tarping a load, chaining a load. And I actually trained a refugee from Myanmar.
Hmm.
And he was talking about, man, getting on the road was so bad. He was thinking about carrying a gun with him. But I mean, he's going into like rural areas.
Hmm.
Where are you based at? Is it mostly city or urban or
It's like suburban.
suburban?
I'm
I
like
got you. I got you.
20 minutes from the city.
What major city are you by?
Richmond.
If Richmond? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I go by Richmond all the time, man.
Oh, we should hang out.
It's a beautiful, beautiful city. Um, I really like that old, right by the train station, that old clock tower.
Yeah, yeah. I know which one you're talking
When
about.
you're going up 95,
Hmm.
it's kind of I like shows kind of the history,
Hmm.
of the town on top of the modern development. Maybe we'll get a question from our audience. And this guy, Commander Comrade Alpha Male, interesting name to say the least, has a question for Xiangyu. Do you think China is socialist?
I don't think it's something that I can decide.
Hmm.
It's I mean, you ask people in China, the common answer is it's complicated. There certainly are there's no denying that with reforms and opening up, certain capitalist relations have been reintroduced into China. Now, whether or not you consider that, revisionism capitalism, oh, we have a saying in Chinese, 盖棺定论, which means you will make the decision after the coffin's been closed. When it comes to people, and I think right now, I mean, if from a certain perspective, I can see why people would say it's revisionist and it's gone on the capitalist road. But then you hear the other arguments, and you're like, well, history will decide if that's true. But one thing that I do agree on is that should not be questioned is China is a sovereign country whose sovereignty should not be infringed upon by imperialist forces like the United States, and that it should be able to develop like and be successful or fail on its own accord.
Maybe you can get it ahead. Are you for, maybe you can talk a little bit of some of the successes in China, like lifting millions of people out of poverty. I mean, is the Wall Street Journal right when it says it's capitalists that did this, or does it have something to do with the fact they centrally planned their economy?
I think it's both. Like I said, reform and opening up did introduce certain capitalist relations into China, and it was done with the intent of it. The way that it's explained by its proponents is that it enabled China to um, improve its productive forces in the shortest amount of time. And I mean, the technology transfers were very real during that time. Now, of course, that did come at a cost. There was increased inequality and stuff of that nature, you know. But at the same time, people were also while while the wealth gap was widening, people were also becoming wealthier and enjoying higher standards of living at the same time. But the other side of the argument is that the economic growth that began that we saw in the 80s really began in the 70s, and that's also true. So you know,
Well, I mean, these are complicated issues,
it is
and
complicated, and
it's
I think it's a divisive issue that I don't think is the focus of this episode.
right
But
on.
that's basically my stance. I mean, do I sometimes think wonder, well, why do we need billionaires like as like doing carrying out not carrying out but taking part in these sorts of developments? So I sometimes wonder that. Sure, definitely. But at the same time, I do believe that these are issues that the people who are living in mainland China should be handling. And from our perspective, people who are living in the imperialist core first are the most relevant position for us at this point is to oppose this country's imperialist meddling with all the affairs of all other countries.
Would you say that's the main? That's one of the main contradictions of the day, is the U.S. and Europe interfering, suppressing the global South.
Yes, I do think that imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism, and the United States, without a question, is the number one superpower and the number one oppressor, imperialist oppressor, to be exact. That's why I mentioned in my article, you know, like what use is like, for example, another issue bring up with like the whole social issue thing. People were like, well, think about, you know, for example, LGBT issues. They're under Joe Biden, we'd be much better off. But I don't really believe that when people like Joe Biden will continue to fund right-wing extremist fundamentalists in Syria who kill gay people, you know. And at the same time, like, why is the Democratic Party seen as a pro LGBT party today? It's not out of the kindness of their heart. It's because of all of the activists who have fought so hard for that recognition for decades, and they decided we cannot afford to piss that segment of the population off. We need their votes. You know.
That was interesting. So you mentioned how Democratic Party comes off as being pro gay rights, being pro
Pro
LGBTQ.
everything, not pro
Mhm.
you know, minority rights. The it tries to portray itself as the party of social justice.
But then when you look at its policies,
Mm-hmm.
especially
Foreign
here
policy.
with especially even internally. If you look at Biden being the writer of the crime bill, and Kamala Harris being the enforcer of the crime bill and mass incarceration,
Mm-hmm.
and then you got Democrats in Afghanistan backing warlords who pour acid on women's faces. I mean, just as almost as a person of faith that values human life. Like it's just, it's
It
just
doesn't care about
disgusting.
minority people in America. It cares about
Um,
minority votes.
ah, that's very, very well um, summed up. And what about when they come off, and then the
This is
things,
why
go
I
ahead.
mentioned anti-imperialism is very important, because a lot of times if you just look at the United States, but even if you just look at the United States, you'll also see, like, the crime bills and the mass incarceration and the prison industrial complex, the military industrial complex, and all of that. But then if you don't look at, if you leave imperialism out of the picture, then it's still incomplete.
Right on. Well, my position, I was trained as a Marxist Leninist by some of the older comrades, and they prefer to call a lot of what people call as Afro American rights or Latino rights as oppressed nations. The
Yes.
oppressed nation of Afro America, the oppressed nation of Chicanos and Aslan.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes them clear, like, even if that's not the terminology today,
I agree with them.
okay, that, I mean, it makes a more scientific argument.
Because oppressed nations deserve autonomy. Right now, we don't really talk about, I mean, a lot of people, especially the DSA types, while they talk about BIPOC or whatever, they do not talk about, the right. Oh, the garage is opening. Um, they do not talk about the right of self-determination, and, like, for example, the black belt, if they want to succeed and form their own state. For example, like the stuff that Harry Haywood wrote.
Maybe you could tell us a little more about that. Harry Haywood.
He's I read his autobiography earlier this year. One of the most inspiring works I've ever read. You should read it. He not only talks about, he lived through a lot of history. He's you know fought in World War One, also participated in the Spanish Civil War. He was part of the war effort during World War Two. He was part of the CPUSA and witnessed its rise and fall. He was one of the leaders when it comes to formulating the theory that Black Americans are an oppressed nation and not just a racial minority, and how the Black Belt, like I'm at a loss for words right now. But he's also gone to the Lenin School. He studied revolutionary theory in the Soviet Union, and he's met Comrade Stalin. He's so you learn a lot of history, but you also learn about a lot about theory, because in his book he also breaks down, like, why he comes to his conclusions, like when he made his formulations, and then how that was adopted by the CPUSA, but then eventually when the CPUSA became more apparently opportunist, especially under the leadership of, I believe, Browder, how that was kind of dropped, and you can kind of see the remnants of that in leftist politics in the United States today.
I mean, these are complicated issues, but
Mm-hmm.
it's good to understand these. At least try to understand them on a material basis,
Mm-hmm.
especially from every angle. We're being twisted and being pulled by Democrat front groups, organizations, our media to support to act in a way that doesn't. It's not a threat to U.S. imperialism.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see if anybody in the audience. We got a good group of folks right now. Shout out to the Peace Report, very good anti-imperialist channel, for being with us. You're able to access the comments? Is there anything in there you
Yes.
see
Kind
as a
of read.
question that you'd like to respond to, or if anybody would like to post a question that my guest could respond to, that'd be great.
Rhee was immensely unpopular, so much that Park Chung-hee led a military coup against Rhee due to years of. Yes, that's totally correct. For people in the audience who want to know more about that history, I highly recommend the book Korean War 1945 to 1953 by Hugh Dean. That's Hughdane, and also the works of Bruce Cummings, Bruce Cummings, specifically, especially his two books, The Korean War and North Korea. Yes. Anything else? Those leftists in the West that accused, okay, Trotskyism is the best example of class reductionism. Yes, I agree. Hello, everybody that just read.
Maybe you can speak on Trotskyism for a moment. It was very big force at my educational system. When I went, I went to college here in North Carolina, and I went to UNCG. ISO was the only socialist organization on the campus, and I was out in the community doing anti-war work, working with civil rights leaders and working within the union movement. And the student group seemed to only want to support one gay rights rally a year. That was
They had a quota.
That was their thing. Maybe you could speak a little bit more on that.
It's a mixed bag because you talk to 10 Trots, you get like 15 different definitions of what Trotskyism is. But I think from my experience, I'm talking with some of the people from like Socialist Alternative or the IMT. They're pretty shit when it comes to like anti-imperialism, especially. But they're also just it seems to be this very kind of middle class rooted form of Marxism. It's kind of it's Marxism presented in a way such that you don't have to question your worldview if you are someone from the middle class or the middle classes in like the imperial core. That's how I would sum it up. For example, every country that has actively fought against U.S. imperialism is just a degenerated worker state or just Stalinist or bad. Like they have nothing good to say about, especially the DPRK, but they have nicer things to say about Cuba. But I think it's just because with Cuba they've done a better job with outreach among and plus they have a lot of support in Latin America, especially among Spanish speaking leftists, whereas Korea doesn't really have other countries speaking Korean who also like sympathize with their cause, really. So
right on. So I'm looking in here. Shout out to Silas Manfield. Big thank you to you. And also I mentioned the Peace Report. That's one of my big inspirations. I believe he's of Korean ancestry. He does a great anti-imperialist. Mr. Willie Chico, I believe. Great anti-imperialist work. Very glad to have him with us. And is there anything else like you want the viewers to know about? Any important issues? Any highlights in the news? What's going on?
Not that I can really think of, but I think in terms of United States policy, now that Donald Trump is probably leaving the White House, we're going to be on the left. We're going to be losing a lot of people who have pretended to be leftists when they're really just kind of Democrats who like the color red, for lack of a better term. So we're going to be lesser in numbers, but think of it as a purge of the less dedicated elements among the U.S. left. And really, it's our time to shine, to really highlight the Democratic Party's hypocrisy. I'm not saying this because, I support the Republicans, but it's like people who are progressive minded already see the Republicans as like the bad party anyways, but they kind of hold on to this false hope with the Democratic Party, which is why I like to stress that it is very important for us to highlight the fact that Joe Biden will not be that much different from Trump, and how the Democrats and the Republicans have more in common than they differ, especially when it comes to foreign policy and imperialism. So people are saying, oh, they're gonna push Biden to the left, and we see like with his cabinet choices so far that that's not gonna happen. And to really, while people like AOC are gonna continue being careerist opportunists, we need to be principled and really rebuild like what Dust said in the beginning, the anti-war movement, but also connect that with the struggles that everyday people, like everyday working people especially, are facing, like evictions and prohibitively high medical care costs, education, like the fear of losing. Oh, I already said eviction, but that sort of stuff.
Um, what do you mean a purge? Like what I mean, do you see similar like I remember the 2003 anti-war movement
Yes.
under Bush was the highest levels in
And then it
anti-war.
died as soon as Obama went into the White House. So we can't let that happen. Well, we can't let that happen. I mean, people are going to be leaving the broader left and go back to enjoying their brunch. What I mean by purge is um think of it as a blessing in disguise. Okay, we might be fewer in number now, but the numbers that we have left are more dedicated to socialism, communism, anti-imperialism, racial justice, LGBT justice, all that sorts of stuff. And not only just in a very narrow-minded US centric perspective, but also an internationalist one. And yeah, that's basically what I mean. It's so we cannot be discouraged by this, and in fact we should be encouraged and think that now it's our time to shine and really work hard to build up solidarity and more class consciousness and also I guess geopolitical consciousness. Yeah, and connect the various struggles that people are facing with the stuff that we talked about earlier in this episode. Oh, I'm looking at one of the comments. Trump said he would remove U.S. troops from Korea and Japan if those countries didn't pay up. I will miss him for the fact. Was hoping that Trump would blunder U.S. imperialism enough by 2024. Well, he can say he wants to remove troops from Japan and Korea, but he's not the only one in charge of these things. And yeah, there is the factor of him being the less competent imperialist. Build
I,
up solidarity with our alienating peeps. What does that mean?
um, uh, I just wanted to respond to that. I've actually been kind of, I mean, I've been really happy about Trump lowering troop levels in Afghanistan. And I don't see it as it doesn't mean that Trump is like amazing. Oh, he's a
Definitely not.
racist, bigot, imperialist, but the fact that Trump can take down these troops levels when Obama advertised himself as an anti-war candidate. Not only is it possible to remove these troops, if we get the power to push them, but it just shows how rotten the Democratic Party is. That in comparison, Trump on these issues of troop levels is a better candidate on these specific issues. It just shows how rotten and imperialist the Democratic Party truly is.
Exactly. And it's really funny how as soon as Trump is talking about removing troops from Afghanistan, how like Biden supporters are coming out and just like crying how that's ridiculous and how that's bad for the US. It's whenever Trump stumbles across the right policies, whatever his reasons may be, like a lot of the liberals will just start attacking him from the right. Like when he met with Kim Jong Un, you know, hell, he didn't really even give the DPRK that like concessions at all. Like the sanctions are still there, but the mere fact that he gave Kim Jong Un the photo op, which I mean did look good for Kim Jong Un, like the people, the liberals were just attacking him from the right and just basically complaining that he's not imperialist enough, that he's not, tough enough on the DPRK, which is just ridiculous. Oh, I see another Romance
I
of the
just
Three Kingdoms reference over here. Xiangyu, how are things between you and Liu Bang? Well, I'm Xiangyu, not Xiangyu, so can't say. No comment.
all right. I just want to respond. Talking about attacking from the right.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I went on the streets with some comrades opposing Trump, and this was around the impeachment. And if you look at what the impeachment was, it was the Democrats were mad that Trump wasn't arming a government that is basically infiltrated by neo-Nazis in the Ukraine. Like he didn't arm them, he didn't give them aid fast enough, and that's the reason why he was impeached. I mean, that's that's a great example of the Democrats attacking who they claim to be a fascist. He has very many fascistic tendencies.
Oh yeah, like
But
2014. That's when the color revolution happened in Ukraine. I didn't see any anti-fascist demonstrators against Obama.
Yeah,
See,
exactly.
and that's what we need to work on. Like when Joe Biden becomes president, he's going to be doing the same stuff. Who's going to be there to protest them if not people like us?
How do we get people to see this stuff?
We have to just we have to patiently and ceaselessly and patiently work on just educating our peers and the people that we interact with, people, our neighbors, our coworkers, our etc. But obviously we got to do it in a smart way that doesn't alienate them. We can't just shame them for not knowing these things, but at the same time we have to say, hey, this isn't the full picture, and this is why, this is why we believe what we believe, and and this is why you have your understanding, and I respect that, but please consider that you have reached this understanding because you've been told this by, so and so and so. And you have to open their eyes to a lot of the power, because a lot of power structures that are out there. Because I think William Bloom, the writer,
No.
the guy who wrote Killing Hope and Rogue State.
Oh, you introduced that. You suggested that to one of my more liberal friends.
Yes.
From New York. Could tell us a little more about him.
And he describes a lot of the American citizens like this. They're kind of like the children of this mafia, like mob boss, who's really nice to the kids at home. Well, to certain Americans, anyways. I mean, I'm sure like a lot of people who are living in America can't say the same. But I mean, there is especially the middle class white Americans, especially. They have this idea of what their dad or their government is like, not knowing what kind of heinous stuff he does outside of the home, and then acts all surprised when someone does something to him or says he's a bad guy, or chucks a firebomb into the living room, like as in the case of a mob boss. Like why there would be people who think he's such a terrible person. It's this sort of blissful ignorance and this sort of I guess conditioning by the mainstream media. So this is something that we need to work on. We need to open the eyes of our friends, our peers, and just let them see, hey, this is the kind of stuff we just need to educate.
I put this comment from Lucas T. Marshall echoes exactly what you were saying.
Yes, in much better words, much more elegantly than I put it. I'm not a good speaker, I must say.
No, it's you got to work on it. Like not everyone is. I mean,
yeah.
I think you have a wealth of knowledge to offer folks. So build up solidarity without alienating people. I mean, we don't have to denounce groups, but we should find common ground and try to show them the correct ways.
Exactly.
I want to just respond to this comment right here. Trump better on troop levels. I guess y'all haven't been paying attention. He sent armor into Syria to secure oil. Armor requires more troops for logistic native idiots. naive. So I want to touch on this, and this is a very emotional response. And when I was said that Trump was better on troop levels, I was specifically referring to Afghanistan. And this is the left, this is the Democrat Republican highly emotionalized atmosphere we live in. If you see anything good about Trump, you're attacked. If you say anything good about Democrats, you're attacked from the other way, and vice versa. It's just this highly. If you're not against Trump, you get where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
Like, um, maybe a little bit response to that
If you
political dynamic.
criticize Joe Biden or say that he is um not much better than Trump, it means you're a Trump supporter. That sort of dichotomy.
Yeah, it's so frustrating. No one for
And no,
Marxists.
we're
Go
not we're
ahead.
not saying that Trump is an anti-imperialist by any means. No, we're not saying that he is an
Exactly.
imperialist, but at the same time, if you read John Bolton's book, that like talking about Trump and the way he runs the government, he has a lot of incompetent moments, and oh, that's in some ways that's good for the rest of the world.
Right. So Trump's incompetence is beneficial to the global anti-imperialist movement. So maybe we can talk about this. Was the position of some communists to tell people to vote for Biden because Trump is the greater danger? Do you think that was the correct policy?
I
Do
do
you think
not.
that? And why do you think that?
You're voting for Biden. You're basically voting for Obama. You're voting for what got Trump into the White House in the first place. It's kind of like we talk about, if you want to talk about harm reduction and working within the system we have, why not go third party? If you get like to the, I guess, the 5% threshold, it gives them like, it makes them eligible for federal funding, and it's a good platform to use to make people more aware of certain issues. I mean, no matter how you vote, like the working class loses, and I really don't like the way that people are like, "Oh, Trump is the most dangerous president we've had." I mean, you look at Obama, you look at Bush, you look at Clinton. Those are the ones that have existed in my lifetime. It's were things really that much better when like George W. Bush was in the White House or when Bill Clinton was in the White House? I don't believe so. And I think it perpetuates this hyper focus we have on electoral politics. Now, I'm not going to go and tell people not to vote. You vote however you want. But at the end of the day, we need to realize that it's business as usual for the majority of the people in this country, the working class. That's the way I see
Let's.
it.
I don't think we're going to get to this commenter. We set our position on that. Um, we're coming close to the hour. I just want to thank you. I believe this was a great conversation. Maybe if maybe you can end this on a bit of a positive note. I really liked what you said about. Um, I really liked what you said about maybe the anti-imperialist forces will be smaller, but they'll be more dedicated. And maybe I think this is positive. If we talk about the labor aristocracy in the United States, has really been falling, has been dwindling ever since the I call it the three prongs: neoliberal austerity, globalization, which was made possible by the microchip revolution or automation. And there's more opportunity ever to mobilize workers who were formally a part of the labor aristocracy.
But at the same time, workers who are part of the labor aristocracy might maintain that sort of mindset and then just devolve into fascism.
Mm-hmm.
There is that risk. As as crisis emerges and as living standards go down, you can't really just sit on the fence anymore as a liberal. You kind of just have to choose, either be a communist or become a fascist. Even if you're not consciously one, you will become one or the other.
Wow. I've often said that there's only two real forces,
Hmm.
the communists and the fascists, and which one really are you? And I mean that's really that really gets down to it. So any quick ending notes? We just reached the hour.
I guess for people who enjoyed this conversation, feel free to follow. I'm banned on Twitter, unfortunately.
Hmm.
I'm on Instagram. My Instagram handle is Comrade Xiangyu, so it's Comrade and the way my name is spelled over here.
You can type into the comments or
Oh,
leave a
really?
comment afterwards. Yeah.
And well, people
Um,
watching on YouTube won't see, so I'm just gonna
well,
say,
I
yeah.
think it goes to both. I think it
Oh,
goes to
really?
both. If you
Oh,
type in the public comments,
I
it
can't.
goes
I
up.
can't type there.
Okay.
It's whatever.
I'll
And
post it
I'm
later.
on
But
Instagram there. You can
mhm,
also follow me on YouTube. It's youtube.com/XYZ rap. And I was just wondering, do you think I can plug that fundraiser I set for my Cuban friends?
sure, that's fine.
Yeah, I guess the link will be in the description, and what happened to my Cuban friends is in the description there. If you can help, just a little bit, even if you can't, like if you just spread the word to some friends who you feel might sympathize with that, then just please consider. It'll mean a lot to my friends and me because they worked their asses off over the year, and then they just really got screwed over last minute by airlines that are just preying on people who want to travel now but just don't have too many options. Hey, I told them to stay put in China for a few more months and wait till more flights are available, but no, they picked the charter flight with a bunch of hidden fees. So, but it, what's past is past, and right now it's just I guess kind of reducing the blow and making things a little bit easier for them.
Well, thank you, and I was very glad to have you on the program today. Have a good rest of your day.
Yeah, you too.